Hello and welcome to another edition of The Front Page on GNAT TV. My name is Andrew McKeever. I'm the managing editor of the Manchester Journal. It's my pleasure to be your host today. As many of you know, the legislature is back to work, convened for a new biennium earlier this month, and we're privileged to have with us today in our studio to talk about some of the work the legislators will be doing, to have our two state representatives from the district that includes Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and most of Sunderland. That would be Bennington 4 if you're a hardcore political junkie. And so with us today in the studio are Cynthia Browning, who is starting her sixth term as a state legislator in Montpelier, and Steve Berry, who just won election for the first time last November. Cynthia, Steve, welcome to GNAT.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to have you both with us, and thank you for making the time to be here. We certainly had an interesting election last November. I think no one expected the governor's race, for instance, to be as close as it was, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, the political implications around that, the fact that the governor had to be essentially elected by the legislators at the start of the session. But let's get started on some of the big issues that, from my perspective anyway, seem to be important. And I guess the one that seemed to be the predominant issue in the immediate aftermath of the election was property taxes and also the budget and spending. So Cynthia, let me start with you. Do you see the legislature doing anything, I'm tempted to use the word meaningful, around property taxes, any kind of reform? And I suppose the corollary to that is also education spending, which is kind of tightly linked with property taxes.
Well, I think that the speaker is certainly making an effort in that direction. As some people may know, he's kind of redesigned the House Ways and Means and the House Education Committee. It used to be that the responsibility for the property tax was entirely on Ways and Means, and education policy was in the Education Committee, and he sort of shifted it so it's more a joint responsibility. So the Education Committee is looking at financing and property taxes and costs as well. And he has changed the membership so that there are people with expertise in property tax and education financing on the Education Committee. So I think that's a very interesting development and possibly overdue. He has called for proposals from every Vermonter about how to address spending and finance for education, and my understanding, he's just released all of those proposals, and I myself sent one in, and the next column I do for the Journal will concern my proposals. I guess my concern is that we've kind of gone through this before, and a lot of times we just kind of do little things around the edges, and it doesn't really get at the core. And for me, the core is there are spending items, cost items in the education fund that are not education, and those state policy programs need to come out and be financed in the general fund. And I have proposals about how to do that. Until somebody does that, saying to the districts, you have to spend less when you're financing state policy goals in the ed fund, I don't think there's a lot of credibility there. So that's the most important issue to me. I'm also willing to consider things like caps on the rate of growth of education spending, staffing ratios. I'm willing to consider any of those things, and they'll be hard for us. But I think what people need to understand is that we have a really big problem that has been neglected, and it's not going to be easy to solve it. I was a little taken aback when the speaker and the governor both said, oh yes, we want to address education property taxes and we have a problem. Both of them have been in positions of power for some 6 years, and they haven't really done anything. So forgive me if I'm a little bit skeptical.
Okay. Steve, what's your take on it? Do you see the groundswell for any kind of meaningful change or reform or overhaul, whatever the right term is?
Well, I'm listening, but I haven't heard anything yet. And I think that the proposals that are coming in will be interesting to see if there are some nuances here that really make a difference, if there's some good proposals. They've asked for any proposals that people want to advance. Which indicates to me that there is, on the one hand, an openness to hearing from many, many people. On the other hand, it indicates to me that they don't have a solution. I don't know. That may be a little bit harsh, but I'm not sure. And so I need to read and study and to think about how this goes forward. I think that what you say, Cynthia, is right, though. I think that you can't commingle these funds. the general fund, that should be separate money. That should not be money that comes out of education to pay for other things. And so I agree with that. I think that that's important.
But if the general fund money that goes into paying for education were to be segregated completely, I mean, wouldn't that sort of force property taxes up even higher than they already are?
That's not what I was talking about. The general fund is required to make a transfer in the education fund
Yes.
already, and I support that.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the problems is that the legislative majority and the governor reduced that transfer
Yeah.
3 years ago by $27 million a year.
Right.
So they have caused the high property taxes right there, and they've never taken responsibility for that. What I'm talking about is tax subsidy programs that help certain property taxpayers pay their property tax. And to get down to the nitty gritty of who we're talking about, it's current use, which is about agricultural and forestry, not education, and income sensitivity, which is about housing subsidy, not education. I support both of those programs. I participate in both of those programs. They're not education. If you want to subsidize the property tax payments of those taxpayers, you need to do it in the general fund. If you do that, the property tax rate can come down by 18 cents. Because those two programs cost $180 million. Then you have to do tax reform in the income tax to get the revenue to cover those programs in the general fund. But they're going to cost less because the property tax payments you're subsidizing have gone down by almost a fifth. So what I'm looking at, and remember, this is just the Browning special. This is not anything anybody else is like advocating. What I'm looking at is a way to do interactive tax reform because we have problems with both the income tax and the property tax. But the first thing, if you want to have credibility with school districts, the state has to take responsibility for what it's been doing in the ed fund, and it has to either take current use and income sensitivity out, meet those needs, but meet them more cheaply in the general fund. And I would also like to make up that general fund transfer deficit, but there's no money to do that, so I'm not even proposing that.
Well, one of the things that came up last year towards the end of the session was an idea to consolidate school districts, and that's been batted around for a long time. I'm sure nothing ever seems to happen about it because it runs up against that rock of local control and the desire of local school districts to, maintain as much control over their spending as possible. But again, it seems from the outside that high property taxes and school consolidation are kind of closely intertwined. I mean, it's hard for me, anyway, to picture how one would ever get a meaningful reduction in property tax rates without somehow or another reducing the total amount of school spending. Consolidation has been raised several times as one way to do that. And Steve, I'm just wondering, do you think that would be true, that if you had unified, let's say, kindergarten through 12th grade school districts, one supervisory union for that, minimum number of students, I think 1,500 is a number that's been mentioned. Does that have any legs at all in the legislature this year in the wake of the election?
I really can't honestly answer that question now. I'm not sure. There's a learning curve here. I have to do a huge amount of reading in order to understand why we've gotten to where we are right now, and then move on from there. So I can't say what's best at this particular moment. Really, my responsibility, I think, is to listen to people and to learn the best I can to make an informed decision. And I frankly don't know what's best. I don't know about consolidation, whether that's best. I know our independent schools are important here in our area. I support our independent schools. I think that they're fantastic. But I just want to make sure that when I make a decision that I'm well informed. And that's the best I can do at this particular moment, to make sure that I know the best of my ability what's going on and what this really means, what these dollars mean, and what the cuts would mean, and what property taxes really, what the benefits of these property taxes are for our local citizens, or not. I mean, those are sort of rudimentary from my understanding.
Okay.
Could
Sure.
I just comment on that? I think that even in the proposal, the consolidation proposal last year, they actually didn't claim it would reduce costs, because the supervisory union, the administrative costs that they were talking about are a very small percentage of overall cost. The biggest cost in education is the staff costs, and so that's why you hear people talking about staff ratios.
5 to 1 or something like that, lowest in the country.
That's right, and I'm open to consolidation proposals. I think once you get into forced consolidation, which is what the governor actually mentioned in his speech, particularly when you have what I consider the state abusing the education fund by failing to fund the transfer, by funding, other policy goals on education property tax dollars. When you have the state doing that, it's kind of hard for me to say, oh yeah, we should close all these small schools to bring property tax rate, when the state itself is causing property tax rates up to be higher than they would otherwise be. So that's kind of a problem with me. But you are correct that if you have a whole bunch of small schools and if you consolidate them into larger schools, the fixed cost of education would likely come down. But by how much and at what cost? The other thing to look at in the proposal I was talking about a little while ago, if we could lower property taxes rates by 18 cents, you would no longer need the small schools grant. So we'd no longer be actually subsidizing small schools. Those people who want small schools would have to take responsibility for having it. If you want it, have it, pay for it. But at least the rest of us wouldn't be actually subsidizing the lack of consolidation, which is what's going on here. And I say that knowing that Sunderland gets a small school grant. So, there's a lot of different things to balance, but I don't think we're going to get anywhere unless everything is on the table and nobody says, this is a sacred cow, you cannot touch it. And that's what I see too often. And so I think we need to really be willing to discuss everything. But, the other thing about the forced consolidation is I've heard people say that small schools have closed. But in the past, it wasn't the state saying you need to close your school. It was the community coming to the realization that they had to do it. And now that there's downward pressure, people are going to resist even more, when if they were left to themselves, they might come to that realization.
That's because the financial crunch is a
Financial
little bit
realities,
tighter.
yeah.
Well, we could probably talk about this
Yes, we
subject
could.
for
Sorry.
the entire show, because there's so many
it's really
fascinating
important.
nuances to this. I mean, you mentioned the small school grant, the phantom students thing. It's really quite fascinating, if it wasn't so financially daunting. Let's turn to a subject I know there's a great interest to you, Steve, and that's the whole healthcare situation. Single payer, I guess, is not going to be happening this term anyway. The governor seems to have taken it off the table, but there have been other proposals going on, and one of them that surfaced over the weekend, and I'm sure was probably out there before that, is for some kind of like a hybrid version of Vermont Health Connect, the health exchange between a state and federal model, I guess has been tried in a couple of states. I guess I just wondered if you thought that or some other, what else are you hearing up in Montpelier about, where we're going to be going? Are we just going to kind of muddle along with Vermont Health Connect and what we're doing now and hope that kind of gets squared away? Or do you see some impetus perhaps for a renewed effort around a single payer proposal, since the start of your session this year was characterized by a rather, I guess, colorful demonstration by some folks who were somewhat disappointed that the governor was not going to be following through on that.
Yeah, well, and rightly so. I don't think that their methodology was particularly great, but the governor made it very clear that he was for universal health care. And then for a few weeks before, right after the election, well, just in December, he announced that that's not going to be on the table, really.
The numbers didn't add up.
The numbers didn't add up. And so I think that those of us who believe that everyone should be entitled to see a doctor, really, we had the wind taken out of our sails. I still think that universal health care is important. And I think that as we go forward, it will reemerge. I think that there are some modest proposals that are going to be advanced in this session, but it's not going to be to the degree to which we had anticipated earlier. And you can't do universal health care if you can't fund it. I mean, it's just, unfortunately, it's just that simple. If you don't have the money, you can't fund it. You have to push the pause button and try to come up with something more modest and reasonable that allows you to get at least part of the way there. And I think that that's going to be advanced. I think that there is going to be something very modest that comes in that allows us to move in that direction. And I feel encouraged by that. But I think that we have a huge problem with the Health Connect. I have personally tried to get into the system and have had a great difficulty doing so. I understand constituents who have had this problem. And they say that I'm in the system and that they're going to send me an invoice and that I have been approved for health care coverage and so on. And it's taken 3 months and I haven't received anything. And so, and I have spoken to people in the governor's office and so on, and will continue to do so, because persons who are without health care, particularly if there's something catastrophic that happens to them, you don't want to see anyone be in that position.
Sure.
And so, yeah, there are some big problems, and we can rehash them and whys and wherefores and so on. I don't think that that's particularly helpful, but I think that if you have a modest proposal, something that allows for people to have reasonable health care at a reasonable cost, no matter how you do it, whether it's Blue Cross Blue Shield or another carrier or your own carrier, I think that that's probably the best way to go right now.
Okay. Cynthia, let me ask you, what was your reaction to the governor's budget address? I mean, there were some interesting ideas that he threw out there, one of which was just to kind of follow up on what Steve was talking about here, a 0.7% payroll tax to help fund a Medicaid cost shift, which I guess ties into the general conversation around healthcare. There's also another proposal for a tax that would eliminate a deduction on state and federal property taxes for those who itemize their deductions. Guesstimate there was about a $15.5 million savings or new money that would come in to help balance the big picture, which I guess is this $93 or $94 million budget gap that the state is facing in attempting to craft a budget in time for the next fiscal year that starts in July. Just wondered, did you think what the governor outlined in his budget address made sense, moved us in the right direction, or?
Well, from my perspective, I'm a long-term supporter of tax reform, and the Blue Ribbon Tax Structure Commission from several years ago made a number of recommendations as how we should improve the efficiency and equity of our income tax system, and we have not done those. So just dealing with one of the deductions, which is the state and local federal tax, or layering a new tax on top of an inefficient, inequitable tax system that we already have, I'm not going there at all. And one of the things that I think is really tragic is that in the focus on the equity of how we do or do not finance health insurance, we've missed the fact that the entire state government is not financed equitably. But the genius of what the Blue Ribbon Tax Reform Commission suggested is they said, yes, we have to close these special provisions, deductions, credits, exemptions, but we will take the money and use it to lower rates. So for the governor to say, I'm going to take away this special provision, it's just a flat out tax increase. I'm not doing that. You got to give people something. You got to give them lower rates. And that was the genius of the tax reform suggestions of the Blue Ribbon Commission. And the governor has refused to consider it. Former Rep. Jeff Wilson tried to push some of those things. The governor refused to do it. And I think it was a great missed opportunity. So I want to go on with that. I'm not doing any new taxes of any kind until we reform the system we have. But unfortunately, many of the powerful people in Montpelier don't agree with me, or at least they don't agree with me enough to actually do something. And so that is my response to what he said. In terms of the health insurance, increasing the Medicaid reimbursement is a good idea. Should have been done a long time ago. If we can't pay for that public program, how are we ever going to pay for more public insurance? But using the payroll tax, just adding it to everything else, I can't do that. The other thing to focus on is that we are down so low with perhaps as few as 23,000 Vermonters without insurance, some of whom are already eligible for Medicaid and Health Connect and haven't signed up, some of them who don't think they need insurance. Let's get those people covered, brought into the system. It wouldn't cost us that much. And then we actually would have universal coverage, not what many people would really want. But that's a really big success, even though Vermont Health Connect has been done so poorly. We've cut our uninsured Vermonters in half. That's huge.
Yeah, that's a huge
It's
success. That's a huge success right there.
And let's not lose sight of that.
No, that's
Let's
right.
not lose sight of that in the disappointment that many people
Yeah.
share.
Okay.
So I think we need to continue on intensifying and expanding programs like the Blueprint for Health that we know work, fix the Medicaid reimbursement problem to the extent that we can under current budget figures, get those people covered who are not covered, and try to continue to support people who need subsidies to afford insurance. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be the perfect fix, but if you do reliable, modest, evolutionary reforms, you know they're going to work. And that's what I think we need to focus on. So some of the things, and the governor suggested we've got to cover these last people, we've got to do Medicaid. I support those proposals, but of course I don't agree with
Yeah, but that's okay. You don't
Yeah.
have to agree.
We can discuss it.
We can discuss it, and you have to have a proposal.
That's right.
You have to have something that solves the problems.
And by the way, his proposals about Medicaid and the uninsured, I proposed that in a plan that was put out last May. I worked with some other legislators, mostly Republicans in fact. We came out with a moderate health reform plan that took certain steps, not unlike what I've just been saying, and nobody paid any attention to it because everybody's holding out for, the Holy Grail. And now the Holy Grail has evaporated.
So you can't, yeah. So we're at a different point right now.
Yeah.
And so you have to revisit ideas like those advanced by Cynthia and others.
Not just me, others,
Because if you don't, you're not going to have a plan. And it says 23,000 that you're really taking a look at now.
Yeah.
You have to really sort of even lessen that gap.
Right.
So that people
Gets
can
down
become,
to zero, basically.
Yeah.
At the start of the show, I threw out the idea that the governor had been somewhat politically weakened by the fact that of his close call at his re-election effort last year, winning only by about 2,400 votes. And I guess I just wondered, I know it's early in the session and maybe things are still kind of sorting themselves out up in Montpelier, but I just wondered if you had either of you had picked up any sense that more power has sort of flowed to Shap Smith, the Speaker of the House, and ebbed away from the governor. Do you sense that is going to be one of the dynamics we're going to be seeing this winter and spring up in Montpelier, or is that just sort of want talk, for lack of anything better to say at the moment?
Well, I think that it makes sense that the in the balance of power, the legislature was somewhat strengthened as opposed to the governor. But all these issues are so complex, it's going to require everybody to be willing to do hard things to solve them. So the legislature is not going to be able to do hard things without the governor and vice versa. But I think you might feel a certain sense of the shifting of the balance of power. But I really am not a political insider or a political junkie, and so my estimates of that are not really very good. What I think is most important is like what we've been talking about, that everybody has to get the ideas out there, because if people can have good ideas that make progress to solve problems and everybody's paying attention, then you can sometimes do hard things. But if everybody's just trying to protect their political base and look good, we're not going to get anywhere. And the problem is that kind of posturing is
Not unusual?
Yeah. And I think everybody should forget about re-election, forget about special interest, focus on what's doing best for all Vermonters and for the most vulnerable Vermonters, and then see where we do. And if you really succeeded, it would help you. It would help you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the bottom line. I would say. First, I'm new to this political thing, but I'm not one that likes to embroil in political activities anyway. I'm very much interested more in action orientation and what does it really mean, and how do we make the quality of life better for Vermonters. And so whether or not you are a Republican or an independent or a Democrat or a progressive matters less than, well, what really can we all live with and do the best for, and what can we offer that's the best solutions for our people, because they don't really, when it comes right down to it, they don't care either. They want to have something that they can go to the bank with and say, I know my representatives are seeking to do the best on my behalf, and I may not agree with them all the time, but I know that they're in there really working hard to try to listen to my voice and also to advance what we need here in Bennington County. So, that's really why I'm there. So I can listen to all these things, sort of smile, and observe, but I'm really not embroiled in that. That doesn't make me very interested.
We just have a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to ask real quick, are there any local issues or bills that either of you are planning to introduce or thinking about, or maybe have already have introduced into the legislature that deal with things? I know that everything we've talked about, as we said before we went on the air, is a local issue, but is there anything that in particular that you want local constituents here to be aware of that you're kind of interested in, above and beyond some of the bigger picture things?
Well, I'm going to be introducing a campaign finance reform bill. It hasn't been drafted yet, but it's going to require more disclosure of who's contributing large amounts of money to PACs or to independent commercials, because I think that we have restrictions from the Citizens United decision, so we have to have as much disclosure they've allowed, and we don't have that. I also don't think legislators should be able to participate in fundraising during the session, even if it's in a group, which is something that has been done. I will be trying to open up the public records request process to make it happen faster and to restrict the claims of executive privilege to prevent the way the governor was able to hide things. But this is really about going forward, making sure Vermonters have access to governmental processes. And I also did want to mention the possibility that the way in which emergency services are dispatched in our area may be altered because of proposed cutbacks to the Rutland Public Safety Agency. So
those would affect us down here?
Well, there's a concern that if the dispatching is done out of Rockingham, which is across the mountains, there might be problems with the lines sometimes, or the dispatchers wouldn't know which town to call, or there might be other issues. And I haven't gone into this really deeply, but emergency dispatching is something that certainly Manchester is very involved in, and the other towns are very concerned in. We want to make sure that ambulances and fire engines and police can be dispatched properly. So I think that we will need to look into it. I can't, on the face of it, say absolutely not, you can't do this. But if it's done, we need to protect the needs of our constituency.
I'd just like to wade in a little bit. On the House Human Services Committee, where I serve, we've been listening to chairmen of departments and commissioners in health and family and children and drug abuse and all of these issues that affect individuals. And that's where we really are looking at a lot of our focus with what's happening with people in poverty. How do you deal with persons who have needs in our area and so on. And what I can report is that we did have a number of times the secretary of the Agency of Human Services, he came, Hal Cohen, and we have asked him, and there is a budget that is going to be going to appropriations to strengthen our United Counseling Service in Bennington County, which I'm very, very pleased with. It's not only going to be the United Counseling Service, it's also two other organizations, the Southwestern Medical Center and Hawthorne Recovery Center, which is an existing spoke provider. But what this will ensure is better coverage and care in our local area. That is going to go from, and has gone from, Human Services to appropriations, and we do not have final say on that amount of money, but we do feel very optimistic that that's going to be something that we can hopefully have here in Bennington to help people in our area. The other thing is that with the gap, the big budget gap, there is a major concern, and that is with vouchers. Now, as a pastor, I know people coming to the church often, they didn't have a place to stay for the night, and so you find a place for them to stay and so on. It gets very, very costly if you're putting people up in hotels. It gets very, very costly if they're going to the emergency room. They're looking at cutting a lot of money, not quite $500,000 in a voucher system, which I think puts terrible stress upon the system, and it costs way, way too much money. I'm going to be speaking with people in the Joint Financial Office about what those figures actually look like. But I can't believe that a voucher system, which does work, where you can put people up when they have a housing problem and they're cold and they're otherwise be out in the street, that it makes sense for us to cut back there when they will go to an emergency room and the cost is just much larger. So those are a couple of the issues that we're dealing with. Also S9, which has to do with the sadness around the death of the toddlers this last year, and so that has been something that we have been handling in Human Services, and also something that is in the Senate, and we're having joint meetings on that and listening to a lot of opinions, and so those are some of the issues that I'm dealing with right now. Education and those things that we talked originally about. There hasn't been so much interfacing with our particular committee, Human Services, at this time on those issues. I'm sure there will be, but these are the things that we've been focusing in on, and it's been a lot of testimony and going through the psychiatric hospital, looking at that, talking with the Commissioner of Mental Health, all of those things, economic opportunity, how to bring people out of poverty. Those are the issues that I've really been dealing with, and they're fascinating, but they also have implications for our area.
Well, to be continued, I guess. Sounds like you both have a full plates on your hands here as you wade through a lot of very complicated issues. I mean, we didn't even get to a lot of things we could have talked about. Some other budgetary issues and proposed taxes, but we'll have a chance, I think, between now and May or June to come back and revisit those and get another update at some point. Anyway, thank you, Cynthia Browning and Steve Berry, for being with us today, and thank all of you for watching. This has been The Front Page on GNA TV, and we'll look forward to seeing you again the next time. Have a great day.